Hello. In this talk, we're going to talk about progressive web apps, the what, why, and how. So my name is Hjörtur Hilmarsson. I'm a creative web developer at 14 Islands. So we we built this app just as an experiment to learn more about progressive web apps, and would like to share with you the learnings from doing that. The idea with the app is since we are in Sweden, people plan their time a lot in weeks. So we wanted just like a simple app that would show you what week it is right now, as week numbers is kind of the way we communicate when things will happen. So what we'll cover is what are progressive web apps, why should you care, and how to implement progressive web apps. And let's start with the what. So this is Alex Russell, and he's the guy who coined the phrase progressive web apps. He's a Google employee, and what he was basically trying to do was to describe this new kind of web apps that are now possible on the web. And the way he explained it is that these apps are responsive, connectivity independent, app-like, fresh, safe, discoverable, re-engageable, instable, linkable web experiences. So this is quite a mouthful, and it's kind of just like a bunch of words. So I would actually prefer this definition here, which I found on the Google developers website. So it's web apps that use modern web capabilities to deliver an app-like user experience. Or as Alex likes to put it, it's just websites that took all the right vitamins. And this is actually so great. What is so great about all those new capabilities is it's just enhancement to our sites. So we can take a website that we already have and enhance them with these new features just to make them better. Or, of course, we can always build a new app from scratch. So what are these new capabilities? One is up to home screen suggestion. So this is a banner that will be shown to the user if he uses the website frequently. So if the user go a few times to the website, the operating system or the browser will detect that this is something that person is interested in, and then it will suggest that that person adds it to the home screen. And this is actually why they are called progressive web apps, because it is just a website that progressively become an app on your home screen. So after you add it to the home screen, it will just look like in every other app on your home screen. When you open it, you will get this splash screen immediately. So the user gets this feeling of perceived performance. So he gets this feeling of something happened immediately, while the app is actually loading in the background. And then it opens. It feels full screen, so it feels like a normal app. It's gonna work offline since all the assets and the content it's gonna be cached on the device. The site is gonna work offline after it has been used one time. You can see we're showing this, by this pink banner at the top that shows the user that he's working offline. And since we're caching the assets and the content, the app is going to perform really great on repeat visits, as it's going to be read from the phone, not from the internet. And we also have this the capability of using push notifications, and it's going to look for the user just like a native app. And then there are a bunch of new cool web APIs that are available now that can enhance those experiences. Here are a few examples, like Web Bluetooth, which allows you to connect with devices around you. Web payments, which is like smooth payments on the web. You don't have to put in the payment information on every website you visit. web sharing, which allows websites to use the native sharing dialog, credential management for easy login, WebVR, geolocation, and more, just to name few. And this is a map I found on the internet, which shows some of the companies that have already implemented progressive web apps. And there are some pretty big names there, like Pinterest, Lyft, Twitter, Guardian, Air France, Air Berlin, CNN, Alibaba, and more, a lot more actually. Let's take Twitter. Twitter has a really good case story. What they noticed was that people were actually using the web app more and more, and that was before they built a progressive web app. So they decided to build a progressive web app, and the results were quite impressive. They actually saw 65% increase in page per sessions, 75% increase in tweets, which is, I would say, is a lot, and 1 million daily visits from the home screen icon, which is quite impressive. So how is the browser support today? So Chrome, Samsung browser, Opera, and Firefox have already built-in support. But it's good to keep in mind that currently this is mainly on Android, where you will see those can fully take advantage of these new capabilities. Microsoft Edge has announced that they have progressive web apps in development. So it's going to be built into Edge on Windows. So PVAs are not only useful for mobile, and what they have actually announced is they are going to allow people or developers to add the apps to their app store. So it's going to be featured in the app store, which is quite exciting, I would say, and hopefully other vendors will do the same. But before we get any further with this, let's address the elephant in the room, which is Apple. Because like currently we don't really know if how far Apple will be ready to build those progressive app features into in their operating system. Because for example, let's say the add to home screen suggestion, those features need some OS integration to work out. And since Apple is quite kind of their business model is built a lot around the native apps, we don't know yet how far they will actually take this. But they have announced that they are building in some PVAs features into the Safari browser. So that is great news, and we'll just have to pray that they will actually take it all the way, so it will be as good or better than on Android. But I think even without Apple, it's useful to start already built progressive web apps. I mean, just by using the progressive web app principles, you actually you're making your app better for all purposes, really. There are some other myths that we should bust here before we get further. Progressive web apps are not really a native app killer. Native apps are still going to be around. They still serve their purpose for a very tight OS integration, as an example. I mean, if you compare this with desktop, there are still today a bunch of native apps, so the same will be true for mobile. But probably web apps will be able to take a bigger part of the cake, if you will. PVAs are not a Google-specific technologies. This is like a common misunderstanding. It's a web standard. It's not only used for single-page web application. This was something that I actually myself thought was what they were proposing in the beginning, but they actually recommend to use like old-fashioned server-side rendering in progressive web apps. And last but not least, it's not really just about apps. It's also just like new capabilities useful for any websites. Like if you think about any publication on the web or something, they can really take use of these new features. All right, so the next chapter in this presentation is about why should you care about progressive web apps. So a quick pop quiz. How many native apps do you think an average user downloads in 1 month? It turns out that the answer is 0. This is according to some research made in the US about people older than 18 years old, that they actually download less or install less than 0 apps on their phone per month. It's quite a shocking statistic, I would say. But still, I mean, people spend most of their time on mobile in native apps. But this is only the 3 top apps. So people will install their like main apps, and they will just use them. And this is usually like Facebook, Messenger, WeChat, or those the big apps. But people, what they do, they actually visit more websites than they visit apps on their phone. So you think about it, that the web is so great for like discoverability, but native apps are great for kind of when you use an experience a lot, when you have to use something many times. It's useful as a native app, but as a kind of to get in contact with your customers, it's good to start on the web. And also, it's great to get rid. I mean, it's good to get rid of app stores in many ways. It takes time to like, from the time you have a problem until the time you actually have an app that solves that problem on your phone. There is a lot of friction between those steps. I mean, you have to find the app, you have to install it, you have to wait for it to install, then you can like finally use it. So there's a lot of friction in there. And then the App Store, they have this, they take share of the app benefit, the app profits, I say. So it can be good for business to be able to direct the customers through to the web instead. And yeah, the thing is, I mean, it's just, it can be good to use the power of the web. The power of the web, of course, lies in links, which make it so simple to share those experiences with others. And then there is this dream of being able to have one code that will work on all platforms. And that's basically what the web is all about. So how actually to implement progressive web apps? So let's get back to our example, the Weka app that I showed you earlier. So the core requirements for progressive web apps are HTTPS, app manifest, and service workers. So HTTPS, to be honest, you should be using already on all your apps and sites. Google has started to punish websites in their search result that don't use HTTPS, and I mean, it's just good for security, so please just do that already. The next step is this app manifest file. So this is both to describe what your app is about, but also to kind of style the app surroundings. So this manifest file you kind of import it in your the head of your HTML. It's a JSON file that looks like this. So you define the version of your app, the name, description, and the icons in this file. And here at the bottom, you define the display mode, which in this case is standalone, which actually means it's going to show full screen. The background color is what shows on the splash screen, and the theme color is what shows when you are switching between apps on your phone. It's good to keep in mind that Apple Safari still uses the old way of defining these information. Here's an example of the meta tag to show it in full screen and define the app status bar, and then the icons need to be defined in the head of the HTML. And here is actually, this is the most interesting technology of them all. This is the service workers are what makes a lot of these new features possible. So it took me actually quite a while to grasp this new technology. So service workers are a proxy that live between the web app and the user. So they're basically installed on the user's in the user's browser. So every time you visit the site, you're actually gonna the service worker is gonna interfere with all the requests and responses that go to and from that app. And the service worker is going to run in a different thread from your app, so it's not it cannot touch the DOM in any way. It can only work as an intermediate between in the communications between the user and the app. So this is how you add it. So you make sure first that the user browser has service workers enabled. On the load event, you register the service worker. And the service worker skeleton, if you will, looks like this. Those are like the main events that you almost will always define in your service worker. There is an install event that will fire when the service worker is registered for the first time. Fetch event is what is called every time there's a request to the app or any resource in the app. And the activate is when the browser detects changes in the service worker, the activate event will fire. So this is when there's a new version of the service worker. So this is usually used to clean up old versions of the cache, as an example. So the first step in our service worker is to think about catching strategies. At the start, you want to have a list of all the assets in your app and the site. So here at the top we have in this case we only have like one. It's a one-page app basically. So it's only the home URL, and then there's URLs to the style sheet, the JavaScript, and the fonts. And you can see for the for the assets that we might change, we have to have a generated key that will change on every version. And this is just to make sure that when we update the version of the style sheet or the JavaScript, the browser will fetch the new version instead of an old one. And then the install event will fire on register, and we will basically, the first thing we will do, we will cache all these assets. And notice that everything is asynchronous here. So the service worker will never block any rendering of the app or anything like that. Everything is asynchronous. So the browser will, and we use promises here in the service worker to make that's a requirement. So then we have to consider what caching strategy to use when. So usually we use the cache first strategy for static assets, but we use a network first strategy for dynamic content like HTML. So the way this works is we basically check, in this case, if it's an HTML document, which is the part that will has dynamic content that might change between visits. We will respond from the network first and then fall back to the cache if the network is not available. And for other assets like CSS or JavaScript, we will respond from the cache first and then fall back to the network if nothing is in the cache. So this is basically how it looks. We the cache first strategy, we fetch first from the cache. If that fails, we'll fetch from the network. If that fails, if that works, we will add it to the cache. And if that fails, we will serve like an offline response, which is usually like an empty file. Network first strategy is kind of the other way around. So we will first fetch from the network, then we will add that to the cache. And if that fails, we will fetch from the cache. And if that fails, we don't have any. We will just respond with an empty file. So now, after we have done this, our app should work offline. And it should perform really well on repeat visit because assets going to be fetched from the cache first. And if you think this code that I showed you is complicated, you can use plugins such as this one, which is, I think it's kind of recommended by Google right now. It's kind of a toolbox that will help you, will actually generate the service worker for you. So you just tell what assets you want to cache, like network first or cache first, and it will basically be done for you, which is quite good because there are also a lot of edge cases to think about. So it's good. I think for us at 14 Islands, we will probably use this on our projects right now. And since we have fulfilled all the requirements, the core requirements for PVAs right now, which is HTTPS, app manifest, and our service worker, our users will get this add to home screen banner when they visit the app frequently. And while you're developing the app, you can actually, it's good to, you can set this flag in Chrome, so it will make sure that it will always show you this banner. So you can just make sure everything is working and the banner will show up. So yeah. Okay, let's talk briefly about development tools. Lighthouse is a really useful app to use. It's an extension to Chrome, and I think it can now run as a standalone kind of library. And what it does, it basically it runs a bunch of tests on your site and will show you kind of so it will give you, it will rate your app, like how well it actually fulfills the PVA requirements. And I'm proud to say that I was able to get 100% with the Weka app, but then I tested this again now a few days ago, and turns out that they have updated the app, and I'm only around like 90% in the results. So I have to go back and make some updates if I want to. I mean, this is not the holy truth. I mean, you can also be kind of smart about what things to implement and whatnot. But it's a really good to kind of help you know how your app is performing overall, and how the kind of how well the Google perceives your or I should say if you have fulfilled, how well you have fulfilled the requirements of PVAs. And then there is this tab in Chrome DevTools, which is super useful, and I was using this all the time while I was developing the app. It allows you to test the app, for example, in offline mode. You can make sure it always, like, the service worker updates on every visit to the site, just to make sure you always have the latest. And you can bypass it for the network when you want to test your site without the service worker. And finally, brief word about push notifications. Push notifications are actually quite tricky to implement, I would say, as you have to both think about the front end and the backend implementation. The backend has to push the notifications, and you have to have a kind of implementation in the service worker to kind of show that the notifications to the user. But what I did is I used this service called OneSignal. It's actually free, and it gives you the backend that you need, and it also gives you a service worker that you can have multiple service workers for your app. So you kind of add that service worker to your app, and then magically push notifications will work. Just like on native apps, actually. Wrap up. So to summarize, progressive web apps are a bunch of new capabilities on the web. It's not a native app killer, but it's definitely going to take a bigger part of the cake on mobile. Let's pray for a good support on Apple iOS, I mean, because that would be awesome. And I think you should start doing this already today, because it actually makes our experiences that we're building, it makes it better for our users. And this is, I would say, the most important part. We should aim to get people to believe in the web again, like make the web great again. Because I think there are a lot of bad experiences on the mobile web today. And it's our job as developers to make this better. Even though it makes our job harder, it makes the experiences better for the user. So that's where I would like to close. I thank you for listening, and check out 14 Islands at 14 Islands on Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And you can send us questions, or if you have some comments or something that you would like to share with us on those mediums. Thank you.